Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our webinar series, Meet CEOs, Transforming Healthcare and Jobs Act Update. My name is Scott Jordan. I am the founder of HealthiosXchange, and co-presenting with me today is Bevil Hogg, founder of EndoStim, a medical device company offering minimally invasive therapy for severe reflux. HealthiosXchange is the premier investment marketplace dedicated exclusively to the global healthcare industry, employing crowdfinance as the cornerstone of a new funding paradigm. HealthiosXchange offers direct access to the broadest opportunities, like EndoStim, on a fee-free, carry-free basis in the most trusted online environment. Since August 2nd, over 2,000 members have joined HealthiosXchange, including emerging growth company executives, accredited investors, investment professionals, and strategic buyers. You'll be placed in listening mode only. If you have any questions, please submit them by entering them into the chat box. We'll be answering questions throughout the presentation, including a brief Q&A session at the end of the webinar. So our agenda is pretty straightforward today. First of all, we're going to introduce Bevil. He's going to introduce himself. Bevil's going to give you a presentation of EndoStim, and then I'm going to give a quick update on the Jobs Act, specifically Title II and general solicitation, since that was passed in September of 2013. And of course, then we'll have some questions and answers. Okay, so having said that, let me hand it off to Bevil, and he will tell you a little bit about himself before he goes in and gives a presentation on his company, EndoStim.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for the opportunity, Scott. I'd like to introduce myself as a CEO of EndoStim. I'm going to talk about EndoStim and the exciting new technology that we have developed to treat gastroesophageal reflux disease. A very brief bio. I was born in South Africa, but I was educated in Europe and came to the United States to found my first company when I was in my early 20s, which was Trek Bicycle Corporation. I founded, or rather I co-founded, because I wasn't the only founder, there were two, in 1976, and built Trek up to about 40 million in revenues, which seemed to me to be a very large company, and sold out in 1985. Trek has subsequently gone on to become one of the largest bicycle companies and one of the best known bicycle companies in the world. After founding Trek, I moved into aerospace composites and produced the first carbon fiber bicycle frame, all molded from graphite, sort of aerospace grade graphite, with aerodynamic features that racing and ultimately for the Tour de France. That company, Kestrel, which I founded subsequent to Trek, I sold successfully, and with a non-compete moved into wheelchairs, which was the closest proximal area to bicycles that wouldn't tread on anyone's toes. I ended up founding a wheelchair company, high-tech wheelchair company, which was funded with venture capital. It's called Medical Composites Technology, which I sold successfully to Everson Jennings, then the largest wheelchair company in the world. I became CEO ultimately of Everson Jennings, which was a public company, and subsequently sold Everson Jennings to the satisfaction of my original venture backers. I was then introduced to a company called Stereotaxis, which was in interventional robotics located in St. Louis. Basically, the Stereotaxis technology centered on the use of automated navigable catheters to treat atrial fibrillation. I raised a few $100 million for Stereotaxis, taking it public in 2004 timeframe with Goldman Sachs, Bear Stearns, and Deutsche Bank on the cover. I retired after about 10 years of Stereotaxis. I was on the board for a few years, and then was invited to take a look at EndoStim. What interested me about EndoStim, and what does interest me about EndoStim, and why I'm talking to you today, is its disruptive technology which addresses a very, very large market opportunity. What interested me about EndoStim's approach to treating gastroesophageal reflux disease is it really changed the way people thought about treatment for acid reflux. Over the years, acid reflux, or GERD, was considered to be an acid secretion problem. And proton pump inhibitors like Nexium and Prilosec were considered to be the definitive solution for GERD. However, more recently, scientists and key opinion leaders among gastroenterologists and surgeons have begun to think about gastroesophageal reflux disease more as a neuromuscular disorder of the lower esophageal sphincter, meaning that the door to the stomach from the esophagus, the lower esophageal sphincter, is dysfunctional. Some even consider this to be a neurodegenerative disease in that the sphincter continues to deteriorate and become more dysfunctional over time. This is not in any way addressed by proton pump inhibitors. PPIs, this is very important to note, fix the acid in acid reflux, but they don't fix the reflux in acid reflux. Patients on PPIs continue to reflux and regurgitate the contents of the stomach and bile into their esophagus, particularly at night. And for those who have a high volume of reflux, this could be very discomforting. The symptoms of GERD are associated with westernized diets. If we look at the spectrum of GERD across the globe, it affects about 5% of patients in developing countries and up to 15% of patients of the population, I should say, in developed westernized nations. Basically, the closer you get to Western diets, the more likely you are to suffer from gastroesophageal reflux disease. The two standard treatments today, sort of opposite ends of the spectrum, are first and foremost proton pump inhibitors like Prilosec, Nexium. But for those patients who continue to suffer an unacceptable level of symptoms, surgery is an option. The surgery is called a Nissen fundoplication, and it involves wrapping the stomach around the esophagus like a belt and suturing it in place. It's pretty invasive and it's permanent. As a result, only a very small percentage of patients who suffer from gastroesophageal reflux disease and who aren't happy on PPIs actually go to get a surgical fundoplication. EndoStim has taken an entirely different approach. Basically, we are using a pacemaker, a gastric pacemaker, to stimulate the lower esophageal sphincter. So direct neuromuscular stimulation, essentially affecting the levels of neurotransmitters in that organ. The huge advantage of what we're doing is that we're not creating an artificial barrier. We're not encircling the esophagus with a band or a wrap or a mechanical collar, but we're simply restoring normal functionality to the sphincter. This is what attracted me to the technology, and this is why we believe that EndoStim is going to become a new standard of care for treating refractory patients with gastroesophageal reflux disease. It's a simple procedure, very safe, and there are very, very few side effects. The basic problem with wraps and collars in treating GERD is that if the wrap or if the collar or if the mechanical device works in preventing acid from leaving the stomach and going into the esophagus, it also makes it difficult for food to pass from the esophagus into the stomach. And as a result, patients suffer from dysphagia, difficulty swallowing, and they also suffer from gas bloat because they can't burp or belch. And essentially what happens is that they end up substituting a new set side effects for the original problem. And most of them don't end up thanking the gastroenterologist who referred them to the surgery. So we think that this therapy gap represents a very attractive market opportunity for EndoStim. This therapy gap is estimated to be about 37% of total worldwide patients being treated for gastroesophageal reflux disease. The total market for GERD patients represents about 500 million patients worldwide in all countries. We have 17 million patients in the United States who continue to experience symptoms of GERD when on PPIs, when taking medication, typically maximum dosage PPIs. When we look at this group, we can divide them up into patients who would be eligible for our therapy. And this represents about 2.8 million patients in the United States, a very significant number. What's interesting is that the American Gastroenterology Association recently reviewed EndoStim's clinical data. The AGA has a working joint panel with the FDA. This panel is called CGIT, the Center for Gastroenterology, Innovation and Technology, and it's a joint panel with the FDA. When this panel reviewed EndoStim's clinical data and clinical results a few weeks ago, they were so impressed with the clinical results, the clinical data, and the side effect profile that they made a recommendation to FDA that our patient pool, our patient recruitment, should be expanded to include those patients who are doing well on PPIs, on medication, but do not want to take medication for life. That would put us clearly in a $24 billion market, which is the pharmaceutical market to treat GERD. The FDA hasn't definitively responded to the request from the American Gastroenterology Association, but we are going to be talking to the FDA about this change in the next few weeks, and we're optimistic that they will respond favorably. In any event, the market for patients with gastrointestinal symptoms of GERD that are not satisfactorily treated with proton pump inhibitors is very large and consists of the core market that EndoStim intends to address. Here we have a comparison, and this is not a scientifically exact comparison, but it's a useful comparison nonetheless, between the market for chronic back pain and what we consider to be the potential market for chronic GERD discomfort. The prevalence of chronic back pain and GERD are about the same across populations. Back pain is also treatable with medication and surgery, but increasingly back pain is treated with neurostimulation. And neurostimulation to treat back pain today represents a $1.5 billion market. Not market opportunity, but actual revenues, mainly in the hands of companies like Scientific, Medtronic, and St. Jude. It's a very large market, and it's growing fast. So here we see a lifestyle disease, back pain, chronic back pain. Nobody dies of back pain, but people suffer from it, being increasingly treated with neurostimulation. And the reason for this is that it's safe, it's effective, and there are very few side effects. If you have surgery for back pain, there's always the possibility that you end up worse than you were before. This is very similar to the surgery to treat GERD. And our contention is that the market for GERD ultimately could be as large as the market for chronic back pain in terms of neurostimulation as a treatment solution. To summarize, EndoStim has a mechanism of action that is created, that is delivered by electrical stimulation of the neuromuscular structure at the bottom of the esophagus called the lower esophageal sphincter. This neuromuscular mechanism of action has been demonstrated in long-term clinical studies to show great efficacy in treating both symptoms and acid with very, very few side effects. And that is what characterizes our technology, and that is what we believe sets us apart from all other contenders in this field. The first slide of our clinical data shows long-term clinical outcomes in terms of patient symptoms. Now, patient symptoms in GERD are measured with a standardized questionnaire. If you go to Zurich, Switzerland, or Memphis, Tennessee, you're likely to be given the same questionnaire. And this questionnaire measures the severity of patient symptoms. In this slide, on the far left-hand side, you see patients presenting with a median symptom score of 9 points. Their symptoms ought to be 0. These patients are on medication and have a symptom score of 9, which means they're unhappy, which is why they're presenting for our clinical study. We take them off PPIs, and you see that their symptom score escalates, gets far worse, to almost 24 points. We then implant the device and turn it on. You can see over the period of 24 months that the symptoms for the median group disappear entirely. So that at 24 months, we have taken a group of patients who presented with symptoms on PPIs to no symptoms off PPIs. In this study, I believe there was only one patient who was intermittently taking PPIs at the end of the study. Of course, symptoms are subject to placebo or sham effect, but obviously at 2 years, one would expect that the effect of sham or placebo has pretty much been diminished. Because of the placebo effect or sham effect of patient symptom reporting, acid is used as the ultimate yardstick for measuring severity of GERD. The measurement is essentially taken with an acid probe, which is placed in the esophagus, and which measures the presence of acid either wirelessly or through a catheter over a 24-hour period. Ideally, one should have 0 acid in one's esophagus over a 24-hour period. But typically, patients who suffer from GERD have up to 10, 15, sometimes even 20% acid present in their esophagus over a 24-hour period. And even people who are normal, who don't have GERD, have some acid. Every time you burp or belch, there's a small splashing of acid into your esophagus. So 4% is considered normal. In this slide, on page 15, we show our cohort of patients presenting with a measurement of 10.3 for pH, which is the percentage of time over a 24-hour period where they have measurable acid in their esophagus. And we see that over a 24-month period, their pH readings are normalized. However, in this particular study, we took our 4 best patients at 12 months. You can see they had a pH reading of 1.8%, and blinded them so that they didn't know whether their device was on or off. We turned off their devices, and you can see the slow regression of their pH scores to month 24 when we turn the devices back on again. This was simply to evaluate in our 4 best patients what the effect of sham or placebo might be. And as we see here, the patients still think they're being treated, but they're not. And we still have this regression in terms of their pH score. This is why pH is used as a gold standard by the FDA and by most scientifically minded gastroenterologists, because it is considered to be relatively stable and relatively immune to sham or placebo effect. The next slide is simply a broader study that has been done internationally in several countries, larger number of patients, and we're actually now treated in this particular study, combined with the original study, close to 60 patients. And you see we get essentially the same results over time in terms of patient symptom scores. And here's the pH data for a larger group of patients across multiple countries, multiple hospitals, multiple different surgeons, and essentially getting the same results. So what this says is that our clinical data at 24 months is relatively stable, in fact very stable. FDA requires that clinical data be measured at 12 months, not 24. Our 12-month data is equally good. Now, I'm not going to go into great detail on this slide because it requires a knowledge of different competitive devices in the marketplace, but this gives you an opportunity to look across all published data for all approaches to treating gastroesophageal reflux disease using a device. The top line is the gold standard. That means the FDA standard. That is the percentage of patients in a given study who have normalized acid or 50% improvement in their acid. You can see here that EndoStim by far has the best results. Likewise, when you look at daily medication use, our results are superior to all others. Any PPI use, same thing. Reversibility, sort of invasiveness of the procedure, we come out ahead of the crowd. But most importantly, when we look at side effects, you can see that the sort of side effect profile of EndoStim is absolutely excellent, and that is coupled with MRI compatibility, meaning that the device can be implanted in patients who can then go on to get MRIs, because one of the problems with mechanical devices is once it's implanted, the patient is no longer able to be imaged using MRI. So then the final line there is good HRQL, which is patient symptom scores. You can see that we have the best patient symptom scores. So the best acid results, the best symptom results, the best profile in terms of side effects, and above all, the fact that we are MRI compatible and safe. So this is a very, very attractive profile for our company and our technology, and underlines why the American Gastroenterology Association made such a strong recommendation to the FDA on our behalf. I'm going to summarize our regulatory and reimbursement strategy in a few words. Outside the United States, we have CE mark approval in Europe. That means we can commercialize in any country in Europe. However, most of the world recognizes the European CE mark standard, so we are now commercializing in Europe, South America, and Asia. In fact, next week we have 3 cases, 3 surgeries planned for Hong Kong. In Europe, we've started to leverage the CE mark approval by creating our own sales force to market principally to hospitals in Germany, which is by far the largest country, one that has a relatively high incidence of GERD. Radiating out from Germany we're now doing cases in Switzerland, Holland, Netherlands, UK, and are about to start doing cases in Italy and Austria. In South America, we've done cases in Colombia, Argentina, Chile, and soon Peru, and we expect approval in Mexico later this year. In Asia, we're doing cases in Hong Kong and India, New Zealand. We just received regulatory approval in Australia and expect to be commercializing there later this year. In the United States, EndoStim has FDA approval to proceed with a pivotal study of 100 patients. We are holding up the start of this study, A, to raise money, to make sure that we have enough cash on hand to undertake a study that will ultimately cost about $7 or $8 million, but B, to see the effect of the American Gastroenterology Association recommendation to FDA that they increase the scope of our therapy to essentially compete with proton pump inhibitors. This slide simply illustrates the commercialization of our products worldwide, showing clinical uptake at both non-reimbursement sites and reimbursement sites. By that I mean that we have to consider that, for example, patients in Hong Kong or Colombia, South America, are not eligible for government reimbursement. So they have to have private insurance. Whereas in Germany or Scandinavia or Australia, patients typically benefit from government reimbursement. So when we look at our clinical adoption plan and our commercialization plan, we always differentiate between private pay or private insurance sites versus reimbursement sites. And clearly the reimbursement sites are the ones that drive our revenues most substantially. In Germany, we have preliminary reimbursement at 11,000 euros per patient, which is $14,000, of which we receive about 9,000, the balance going to the hospital and the surgeon. So that $9,000 reimbursement level in Germany is for a device that cost us in quantity about $1,500. So they're very attractive margins inherent in government reimbursement. Where we are marketing across 3 continents, we are targeting our marketing efforts around patient direct advertising, which we do for local newspapers or joint publications with hospitals, above all online through our website and through targeted internet activities. But we're also targeting surgeons. And we have a pretty broad array of marketing plans and web activities across multiple countries in multiple languages. And this will help us drive our revenues over time. This is a comment from the guy who's considered to be the most prominent gastroenterologist in Europe, and somebody who is considered to be a thought leader. The reason he made that comment is because of our pH success at 2 years, and above all, absence of side effects and safety profile for the technology. Finally, this is our revenue forecast, our financial forecast. Obviously, this is pro forma. It's speculative, but it's not constructed out of thin air, and it's not constructed top-down. It's constructed bottom-up, meaning we know how many countries we're in, how many hospitals we're talking to, how many salespeople or distributors we have, what our ASPs are, what the reimbursement levels are. And we believe that we can get to break even on about 20 million plus in revenues in 2016 on revenues outside the United States. This plan does not include revenues from the US, although we would expect to have approval in the United States in the 2017 or 2018 timeframe. Scott, that is pretty much it in terms of my perspective on EndoStim. I'd like to mention the fact that we have a very substantial panel of scientific advisors who include sort of a who's who of thought leaders in both gastroenterology and bariatric surgery, and we'd be happy to provide our potential investors or investors with further information and perhaps communication with some of these physicians if they would wish to avail themselves of that. So I thank you all for taking the time to listen to my presentation on EndoStim. It's been pretty much one-sided in that I've been talking to you without getting any feedback or questions, and perhaps, Scott, we could open it up to some questions and feedback.
Thanks, Bevil. We've got a couple of questions. First one is describe in more detail your European commercialization strategy.
Okay. In Europe, we have what we would call core countries surrounding Germany. And by these I include Switzerland, Austria, Germany itself, Netherlands, that we are building our own sales force for, and currently have a direct sales force of German-speaking salespeople, regional sales management, who are going directly to hospitals and surgeons and gastroenterologists. It's not a very large sales force currently, about 5 people, but it will grow over time. So we intend to invest substantially in building a direct sales presence in the key countries in Europe. Outside of these core countries, there are other countries like Scandinavian countries, the UK, Italy, Spain, where we use distributors. The only difference is that we're not fielding our own sales force, but we do use our own surgical training team, our own clinical support team, and our own marketing. In the rest of the world, we also use specialized distributors. So we have a specialized distributor in Colombia, in Peru, in Argentina, in Hong Kong, India, and so on. These are typically distributors who distribute other gastroenterology products for major companies.
Thanks, Bevil. Appreciate it. Next question is, why did you select HealthiosXchange, as a vehicle for raising capital?
That's a good question. First of all, we're not raising a lot of capital now. This is a convertible debt offering. So it was a kind of a bite-sized offering up to $7.5 million that we thought would be interesting to take a different pathway to funding. Now, of the $7.5 million, about 1/3 or more will come from our inside investors. These numbers are really too small to attract the major institutional investors, private equity funds and the venture capital funds. It's just too small an offering. So when we deduct out the contribution from inside investors, it leaves us with a pretty small sort of retail offering. And we think that HealthiosXchange is a pretty darned innovative approach to raising money. And it's a fun way to go about meeting people that we would not otherwise meet on the sort of typical venture capital circuit.
Thanks for that. The other last question is the surgical procedure. Can you go into more detail, and how invasive is it, and will it be prohibitive to the adoption rate even with the clinically unmet need that is in this area?
Could you say the last part? Could you repeat the last part of that question?
Basically, they're seeking more information on the surgical procedure here of implanting the device and the impact, if it's invasive or non-invasive in your opinion, and will that have any impact on the adoption rate even with the clinically unmet need in this area?
Yeah, excellent question. First of all, let me describe the procedure. This procedure is done by any qualified surgeon, although could be a general surgeon, although typically the surgeons who perform this procedure are bariatric surgeons or foregut surgeons or esophageal surgeons. The surgery is about as complicated as a gallbladder removal and lasts about as long. It's about 45 minutes skin to skin. The training involves a surgical trainer on our side visiting the site and participating in 2 or 3 surgeries before the surgeon is able to continue on their own. It really involves a laparoscopic placement of 2 leads and electrodes into the lower esophageal sphincter with minimal dissection and stitching them in place. The device, the pacemaker, is placed in a subcutaneous pocket, and that could be done in an outpatient process, or it could be removed and replaced in an outpatient process. But the laparoscopic component involves minimal dissection, a rapid, relatively straightforward, simple surgical procedure to place 2 electrodes on the lower esophageal sphincter. Currently, we are marketing our product directly to surgeons worldwide. Bariatric surgeons are the ones who recruit patients for obesity procedures. They don't go for gastroenterologists. So typically, in countries like Germany or even Colombia, South America, the surgeons have their own patient recruitment ability and do not depend on referrals for patients because they are dominant in doing Roux-en-Y, lap band, stomach stapling, and other bariatric procedures for obesity. And they regard EndoStim as an attractive addition to the surgeries they can offer to their patients. That being said, we're working actively within the GI community in 2 areas. One is to gain endorsement from the societies, as we did in the United States with the AGA, because we think the referral is very important. And we expect that we will get an increasing rate of endorsement by GI societies around the world once they become aware of the mechanism of action of our therapy, the long-term results, and the absence of side effects. However, I should also mention that we are developing an endoscopic device that could be endoscopically delivered into the submucosa of the esophagus. A few years ago, we did some patients acutely using leads that were placed directly into the esophagus through the nose, through the nostrils, and we achieved very, very good results. So we know that an endoscopic approach would be very effective. The challenge has been to develop a microstimulator that is rechargeable at the depth of the LES. However, we are moving forward in that direction with some positive expectations that we could have a device to market in less than 2 years.
Thanks, Bevil. That's a great overview. By the way, for those who are in the Southwest, specifically Phoenix, we're having a roadshow on February 24th at the Ritz-Carlton where you could meet Bevil in person. So please join us. Go to the member homepage, and on the right-hand side, you will see that information. So I just wanted to spend 5 minutes for some of the investors that were interested in journal solicitation, and then also some of the emerging growth executives that are on the call. And one of the biggest, you guys know that one of the reasons why we launched HealthiosXchange is the Jumpstart Our Business Startup Act, called the Jobs Act. It was enacted in 2012, and essentially the Jobs Act was enacted to reduce the barriers to capital formation. So one of the laws that was changed, which has been on the books for 80 years, has been the right to leverage general solicitation to attract investors. And I just wanted to show you a few slides. So essentially, one of the, EndoStim is not utilizing general solicitation at this time, but that could be something that we leverage in the future. Why is it important? Well, let's just face it. Social media has really matured. Take a look at LinkedIn and Facebook and Twitter, et cetera. The ability to identify, contact, and close investors on a global scale is unprecedented. So Title II of the SEC, when they lifted the ban on general solicitation, you've got the 506, and you see it here. There's new rules implemented through the Jobs Act that will change general solicitation. So here's the timeline of what happened with the Jobs Act, by the way, from April 5th, 2012, all the way to September 23rd, 2013, when the ability for companies to generally solicit and use platforms like HealthiosXchange to do that went into effect. Now keep in mind that general solicitation means that you have no relationship with an investor that you're pitching. So that's really definition. Let's go to this slide here. The old rules, you'll see 506, they call it 506B now. The amended rule is 506C, which is for general solicitation. You'll see here for general advertising that will be used in a private offering. And when you talk about the general solicitation, you are talking things like mass newsletters, public profile on a startup investment platform like HealthiosXchange, personal or third-party websites that display openly that the startup is fundraising, public speaking engagements such as conferences, panels, forums, social media platforms such as Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and public videos. So it really has opened up, opened up the opportunity for both investors and emerging growth companies to find themselves more readily. And we'll go to this slide, which is one of the things that we do here at HealthiosXchange in the future specifically, is that we're going to be listing deals on a general solicitation basis, and we have to verify they're accredited. There's a regulation that says that essentially you have to file Form D within 15 days of receiving the first investment. That means that you have to declare that you're publicly advertising your offering under the new 506C regulations. Okay? There is a bad actor amendment, which basically says the issuer or any other person covered by the rule is disqualified for certain reasons, including criminal convictions, etc. And if you do not, the one drawback of the new regulations is that if you do not follow the regulations and general solicitation to the T, there could be a 1-year penalty where you are prevented from fundraising. But I must say that HealthiosXchange is as sponsoring these general solicitation offerings, is making sure that we are very meticulous with every one of the regulations. So, having said that, if you're an emerging growth company that's executive that's on the phone, or if you're an investor, the general solicitation is a great opportunity to both meet companies like EndoStim, and if you're EndoStim, to be able to reach out globally and contact potential accredited investors. Please, if you have a chance, if you're not a member of HealthiosXchange, I would highly recommend that you come in. It's a free platform. You just basically put in your email and a password and city, state, etc., and you'll have access to 5,000 companies, 1,700 strategic buyers, and a lot of functionality associated with networking, friending, following, sharing, and messaging, just like LinkedIn, and join our 2,000 members. So thank you so much for joining. Bevil, thank you for presenting EndoStim, and we look forward to following up with those interested investors and also potentially meeting you at the upcoming HX Roadshow in Phoenix, Arizona on February 24th. Thanks again, everybody.